Mike Tyson talks about Don King now with clarity and anger. Don King destroyed me, he said, not in the ring, financially. He took everything. He controlled everything. And I let him. It's a brutal admission, but it's the truth. For 16 years, from 1988 to 2004, Don King wasn't just Mike's promoter. He was his handler, his puppet master, the man who made millions off Mike's name while Mike ended up bankrupt. Today, Mike is free. He's 58 years old. He's learned hard lessons about money, loyalty, and trust. And when he looks back at the Don King years, he sees them for what they were: systematic exploitation. King didn't build Mike's career. Cus D'Amato did that. King just cashed in on it. And when the money ran out, King moved on to the next fighter. That's what promoters like Don King do. They extract, they take, and they leave nothing behind. But in the late 1980s and through the 1990s, Mike couldn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. King was loud, charismatic, and always around. He made promises. He flashed money. He told Mike he'd make him a billionaire. And Mike, young and without Cus to guide him, believed him. That belief cost Mike everything. When Cus D'Amato died in November 1985, Mike was only 19 years old. Cus had been his father figure, his trainer, his protector. Cus controlled Mike's career with an iron fist. He kept the vultures away. He made sure Mike was surrounded by people who cared about him, not people who wanted to use him. Cus had seen what the boxing business did to champions. He'd watched promoters drain fighters dry and leave them with nothing. He was determined that wouldn't happen to Mike. But when Cus died, the protection was gone, and the vultures circled. Don King was the biggest vulture of them all. King had been trying to get close to Mike for years, but Cus wouldn't allow it. Stay away from Don King. Cus had told Mike repeatedly, he'll destroy you. Cus knew King's reputation intimately. King had managed fighters before, and many of them ended up broke. Larry Holmes sued King and won millions. Tim Witherspoon did the same. Even Muhammad Ali in his later years had been exploited by King's promotional machine. King had a pattern. He controlled the money. He controlled the contracts. He made promises about making fighters rich. And when the fighter's career was over, the fighter had nothing. Cus saw that pattern clearly, and he kept King away from Mike like a guard dog. But with Cus gone, Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton took over Mike's management. They were businessmen, not fighters, and they had their own interests. Jacobs died in 1988. Caton remained, but by then, King had already wormed his way in. He befriended Mike. He told Mike that Caton was stealing from him. He planted seeds of doubt. And slowly, Mike started to believe King was the only one looking out for him. By 1989, King was fully in control. Mike fired Kevin Rooney, the trainer Cus had handpicked. Mike distanced himself from everyone Cus had trusted. And King moved in with his own people. Trainers who wouldn't challenge Mike. Yes men who told him what he wanted to hear. And contracts that gave King control over everything. The fights, the money, the career. Once Don King had control, he tightened his grip. Mike's fight purses started going through King's company. King negotiated the deals. King chose the opponents. And King decided how much Mike would see. On paper, Mike was making millions. In reality, much of it never reached him. King's fees were astronomical. His expenses were unexplained. And Mike, who trusted King, didn't ask questions. King also isolated Mike. Anyone who questioned King's control was pushed out. Lawyers who tried to audit the finances were fired. Trainers who suggested Mike needed better preparation were replaced. Friends who warned Mike about King were labeled as jealous. King created a bubble around Mike, and inside that bubble, King was God. The fights themselves became secondary. King wasn't interested in building Mike's legacy. He was interested in maximizing short-term profit. That meant frequent fights against hand-picked opponents, easy wins that made Mike look good and generated pay-per-view revenue. But it also meant Mike wasn't improving. He wasn't being challenged. He was just going through the motions. And when he finally faced a real opponent, Buster Douglas, in 1990, he lost. The Buster Douglas loss should have been a wake-up call. But King spun it as a fluke. He told Mike it didn't matter, that they'd bounce back. And Mike, desperate to believe, went along with it. King kept promoting. Mike kept fighting. And the cycle continued. Between 1988 and 2003, Mike Tyson earned an estimated $300 million from boxing. Some estimates put it closer to $400 million. It was generational wealth, enough to set up his family, his children, his grandchildren, enough to never worry about money again. But by 2003, Mike was bankrupt. He owed $23 million to the IRS. He owed millions more to creditors, lawyers, and ex-wives. His mansions were foreclosed, his cars repossessed, his jewelry auctioned off. How does someone earn $300 million and end up with nothing? The answer? Don King. King's promotional fees were staggering. In some fights, King took more than Mike did. King's expenses were never fully explained. Chartered jets, luxury hotels, lavish parties, all billed to Mike's account. King also had Mike sign contracts that gave King control over ancillary revenue, merchandise, endorsements, licensing deals. Mike's name was making money everywhere, but King controlled the flow. Mike's lifestyle didn't help. He spent recklessly. Mansions, cars, jewelry, entourage members on payroll, pet tigers. But even with Mike's spending, the numbers didn't add up. Financial analysts who later reviewed the books estimated that Don King and his associates took over $100 million from Mike. Some say more. The exact amount will never be known because King's accounting was intentionally opaque. Mike sued King multiple times. In 1998, Mike filed a $100 million lawsuit against King, alleging fraud and breach of contract. The case was settled out of court in 2004 for $14 million. But legal experts believe Mike was owed far more. The settlement was a fraction of what King had taken, and by that point, Mike was too broke to keep fighting in court. When Mike went to prison in March 1992, Don King saw an opportunity. Not a tragedy, an opportunity. For 3 years, while Mike sat in a cell reading philosophy and converting to Islam, King worked the media. He kept Mike's name alive. He talked about the comeback. He built anticipation. He negotiated with networks and lined up opponents. And when Mike was released on March 25, 1995, King was waiting at the prison gates, literally, standing there with his trademark hair and a big smile. Mike walked out of Indiana Youth Center into chaos. Helicopters circled overhead. News vans lined the road. Hundreds of reporters screamed questions. And there, at the center of the circus, was Don King, arms spread wide, ready to cash in. Within hours, not days, not weeks, but hours, King had Mike signing new contracts. The comeback was already planned. Peter McNeeley in August, then more fights, a rapid schedule designed to maximize revenue. Mike, fresh out of prison after 3 years of forced stillness, didn't have time to think. King moved fast. He always did. And by the time Mike realized what he'd signed, it was too late. The comeback fights, Peter McNeeley, Buster Mathis Jr., Frank Bruno, Bruce Seldon, were classic King operations. Hand-picked opponents who made Mike look good. Pay-per-view spectacles that generated massive revenue, but Mike wasn't ready. His training camps were chaotic. His new trainers didn't push him, and King didn't care. As long as the checks cleared, King was happy. Mike made $25 million from the McNeeley fight alone. But after King's fees, taxes, and expenses, Mike saw a fraction of it, and the pattern continued. Fight after fight, Mike earned millions. And fight after fight, most of it disappeared into King's machine. Mike didn't question it. He was too busy trying to rebuild his career. And King made sure Mike stayed too busy to ask questions. The Evander Holyfield fights, both of them, were disasters. And Don King was at the center of both. For the first fight in November 1996, King rushed Mike into the ring. Mike wasn't ready. He hadn't fought a real elite contender in years. His last opponents had been carefully selected tune-ups. But King wanted the Holyfield payday. The fight sold 1.59 million pay-per-view buys. It generated over $100 million in revenue. King's cut was astronomical, and Mike lost. TKO, round 11, dominated, exhausted, exposed. Mike was humiliated. He blamed the headbutts that cut his eye. He blamed referee Mitch Halpern. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't prepared. His training camp had been chaotic. His conditioning was poor, and King didn't care if he was prepared. King cared about the money. After the loss, King immediately pushed for a rematch. Mike wanted revenge. His ego demanded it. King wanted another massive payday. The rematch was signed for June 28, 1997. What happened in that rematch is one of the most infamous moments in sports history. Mike bit Evander's ear twice. He was disqualified, banned from boxing, and his reputation was destroyed. But even in the chaos, Don King was calculating. He spun the story. He talked about Mike's mental state. He positioned himself as the loyal promoter standing by his troubled fighter. And behind the scenes, King was already planning the next move. Mike's boxing license was eventually reinstated, and King was there, ready to promote again. More fights, more paydays, more fees. The cycle never stopped. Even as Mike's skills declined and his mental health deteriorated, King kept booking fights. Because to King, Mike wasn't a person. He was a product. And you milk a product until it's dry. By 2003, the bill came due. Mike Tyson filed for bankruptcy. He listed $23 million in debts. The IRS wanted their money. Creditors lined up, lawyers circled, and the world watched in shock. How could Mike Tyson, who earned $300 million, be broke? The bankruptcy filings revealed the ugly truth. Mike's finances were a disaster. King's promotional company had taken massive fees. Mike's entourage had drained his accounts. His lifestyle expenses were astronomical, and there was no money left. The mansions were gone, the cars were gone, the jewelry was auctioned off. Mike Tyson, once the richest athlete in the world, had nothing. Don King, of course, was fine. He walked away with his fortune intact. When asked about Mike's bankruptcy, King expressed sympathy, but he didn't offer to return any money. He didn't admit any wrongdoing. He simply moved on to the next fighter. That's what King did. He extracted wealth from fighters and left them with nothing. Mike was just the most famous example. The bankruptcy forced Mike to keep fighting. He needed the money. He fought Clifford Etienne in 2003, Danny Williams in 2004, Kevin McBride in 2005. Each fight was sadder than the last. Mike was a shell of himself. Slow, unfocused, just trying to make enough money to survive. And finally, after the McBride loss, Mike retired. He was 38 years old, broke, broken, and finally free of Don King. Mike Tyson is 58 years old now. He's rebuilt his life. Not his fortune, he'll never get that back, but his peace. He's done therapy. He's gotten sober. He's learned to forgive himself. And he's learned to see Don King for what he was, a predator. Don King destroyed me financially, Mike has said in interviews. He took everything. I was young. I was dumb. I trusted him, and he used me. Mike doesn't make excuses. He acknowledges his own role in the disaster. But he's also clear. Don King was a thief, and the boxing world let him get away with it. Don King is 93 years old now. He's still alive. Still promoting, though on a much smaller scale. He's never apologized to Mike. He's never admitted any wrongdoing. In interviews, he speaks fondly of Mike. He calls him a great champion, but he never mentions the money. He never talks about the contracts, and he certainly never offers to make things right. The relationship between Mike and King is over. They don't speak. They don't see each other. And Mike has made it clear. He wants nothing to do with King. I was his cash cow, Mike said, and when the milk ran out, he moved on. It's a brutal summary, but it's accurate. Don King's legacy in boxing is complicated. He promoted some of the biggest fights in history. Ali versus Frazier, Larry Holmes' title run, Mike Tyson's peak years. He was a master promoter, a showman, a deal maker, but he was also a parasite. Fighter after fighter ended up broke after working with King, and the pattern was always the same. King controlled the money. The fighter trusted him, And when the career ended, the money was gone. Mike Tyson's story is the most famous example, but it's not the only one. Larry Holmes sued King and won. Tim Witherspoon sued King and won. Terry Norris, Julio Cesar Chavez, and dozens of others have accused King of financial impropriety. The boxing world knew, the media knew, and yet King kept promoting. Why? Because fighters kept signing with him, and boxing commissions kept licensing him. For Mike, the Don King years represent the greatest tragedy of his career. Not the losses in the ring, not the prison time, not even the ear bite. The tragedy is the wealth that was stolen, the opportunity that was squandered. Mike earned enough money to secure his family's future for generations. Instead, he ended up bankrupt and broken. And Don King walked away rich. Here's the final question. Could Mike have avoided Don King? Maybe. If Cus had lived longer, King never would have gotten close. If Mike had listened to the people who warned him, he might have walked away earlier. But Mike was young, grieving, and searching for a father figure, and King exploited that vulnerability. He promised Mike the world, and he took everything instead. Today, Mike Tyson is free. Not wealthy, but free. He's no longer controlled by Don King or anyone else. And when he tells his story, he's honest. I let Don King destroy me, but I'm the one who has to live with it. And I've learned, I'll never let anyone control me like that again.